My name is Lindsay Christensen, and I'm from thoughtbot, and I'll be moderating today's discussion, building secure healthcare systems, identifying blind spots in architecture, AI, and data governance. So what does that mean? Well, teams are under pressure to innovate while protecting sensitive data, navigating regulations, and building systems that can evolve over time. Whether you're modernizing existing platforms, adopting AI, or strengthening governance, those things are deeply connected. So today we're fortunate to have these three panelists with different perspectives on those challenges. I'm excited to learn from their experiences and hear how they're thinking about building secure, resilient systems in today's environment. Thanks to everyone who is jumping in right now. Good to have you here. So today with us is David Pace, Executive Director of Merck Research Labs, IT, Enablement, and User Experience. Clarissa Borges, Development Team Lead at thoughtbot. And Joël Quenneville, Principal Developer at thoughtbot. And we're going to hear a whole bunch about how their individual experiences touch these topics we're talking about. So thank you all for being here. So let's start with architecture. Healthcare organizations are expanding API ecosystems, modernizing platforms, legacy platforms, and of course, adopting AI. From your perspective, my esteemed panelists, where are you seeing the biggest architectural blind spots emerge as systems become more interconnected? And Dave, maybe you can kick us off chatting a bit about what you see at the enterprise level.
Sure. So thank you, and let me know if you can't hear me okay. And thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to be in this discussion today. Really appreciate it. So I guess one way that I think of this is that the complexity often kind of bleeds into like the connection points among tech. So like for instance, when you're doing something new, it's relatively easy if you're doing something net new to kind of high complexity to make clear boundaries, clean architecture. But often that's not our reality, especially at large enterprises. So at Merck, one of the biggest things that's been going on for the last couple of years, certainly from an IT perspective, but even from a company perspective, is we've been redeveloping our clinical development platform. And if you think about clinical development, it's very complex. It's a very long process. It's a very expensive process. So it's hard to get right. We've had an initiative the last few years that we call Zero Gravity. I could actually talk a little bit about the name, but again, it was basically trying to just redo the whole development platform with modern technology. So that when you're doing something new, and we've talked about this publicly with we're working with Viva primarily. We now have a modern platform that's in production. So, new stuff is relatively clean, but the reality is that we have to deal with a lot of legacy, and the legacy can kind of be in all shapes and sizes. It could be clinical trials that already started on the old platform that, we're trying to finish the data management with the existing tool, trying to integrate that data so that you can kind of look across trials. There's just a ton of kind of data munging that needs to happen. So we're building something that we call the CDL, or the clinical data layer. And that's where you see a lot of complexity. It's really merging kind of the new state of the art stuff, acknowledging, that you have to work with some kind of older systems and old data. And I'll just say one more thing. I mean, the clinical sites kind of come in all shapes and sizes. So you have, big ones like Houston Methodist or, New York Presbyterian. But sometimes, you also have like a doctor's office with like a doctor and one nurse. So it's just way smaller, and the levels of sophistication at those sites are very different. So it's just another thing that kind of adds to that diversity of data and complexity.
Thanks. Clarissa, is that similar to what you're seeing in your recent projects?
Yeah, I think one thing that I can bring up here about is about infrastructure. I think a lot of complexity comes like starts to build up once you have a complex like system to manage. Like you have multiple databases, multiple types of environments, multiple like services, and so it's it's helpful to have some build some discipline in how you're managing this complexity in terms of infrastructure. So one of the things that I really like to do or to recommend people to do is implementing infrastructure as a code from like early on their projects because that helps for those who aren't familiar with that concept. That means basically codifying your infrastructure and describing what you have, what kinds of VPCs you have in your infrastructure, what kinds of databases, what kinds of uh, services, anything really in your infrastructure side that helps you create, uh, that helps you document your infrastructure and that helps teams build more confidently against their infrastructure if they are able to see versioning and review each other's code. And that also helps them enforce practices. Um, yeah, I talked a lot.
And all good stuff at that. You had mentioned also, I think, seeing successful implementations of like helping companies with compliance monitoring.
Yeah, yeah. So we had a few projects that they needed to be SOC 2 compliant, and so we also implemented uh, a service called Vanta, which is like a compliance monitoring that helps us continue to like does an audit against our data, our infrastructure, and makes sure we are compliant. We're still compliant. It's very often that you will do like a cluster upgrade in your Kubernetes, and something will happen there that will make your infrastructure not be compliant anymore. And then unless you go through a very tedious audit, you will likely miss that. So it's very important to have a tool like that to help you stay compliant. It doesn't cover everything, but it will cover a big chunk of work from like keeping an eye on your infrastructure compliance.
And for those, you're probably familiar with Merck. If you're not familiar with thoughtbot, we're a software consultancy. So Clarissa and Joël are jumping into all kinds of different code bases, different challenges. And Joelle, you've been with you have quite the tenure. And I think you've seen a lot of legacy code bases. I'm interested your thoughts on this topic.
Yeah, and I've sort of seen a lot of, trends come and go over time. The movement towards having your infrastructure defined in code in a way that's documented in version that Clarissa mentioned um, is a sort of more recent ish movement that I, as a developer, really find helpful, um, especially on sort of larger, more complex projects where I've not been there since the beginning. If I'm coming in the middle of something and being able to just search a repo and be like, oh, there's this setting here, and that's why I'm seeing this behavior and this bug I'm trying to find, as opposed to on larger systems, you might not even have production access to check how the system is configured. You have to ask somebody. And so, there's a lot of operational value to the approach Clarissa was recommending. But even just on the dev side, it helps unblock me to get more work done.
I like to think about infrastructure as code as we used to think about tests. Like, I don't know how it was in your when you first started developing, but when I first started developing
In the
tests,
old days, Joël.
um, tests were seen like as an overhead, like something that was tedious to do. Some developers were still not seeing value in doing that, and now like tests are everywhere, and we prioritize tests a lot. And I think infrastructure as a code is the same. Like if we start from scratch with infrastructure as a code, I think that's very helpful without that.
Pivoting a little bit to some of the things that Dave, you were talking about. You mentioned the idea of sort of aggregating from multiple data sources or combining services. And I imagine that at Merck, you're mostly doing this from a lot of internal teams. A pattern that I've seen in more of the healthcare kind of startup and scale up world is pulling oftentimes data from external uh, services. And these services are often not super reliable. And so you have to put a lot of thought into how you're going to integrate, but how are you going to handle things going wrong? And I'm thinking in particular one case where uh, we were integrating with a third-party aggregator that had a lot of data on a variety of healthcare insurance plans. And on some of our highest traffic days, that third party vendor went down, and we had to make sure that we had something that could mitigate that. And it turns out that while we needed the vendor for sort of detailed high fidelity data, we had a smaller local data set that gave some information that we could show that was enough to allow people to complete some of their tasks, or at least give them a sort of smooth path out without hard preventing them from doing the work that they needed to do. And so what we ended up having was this sort of dual track system where we pulled low fidelity data, attempted to pull high fidelity data, and if we could get the high fidelity data, yes, we would pull that in and enrich what we already had, but we always showed you at minimum the low fidelity data. And so designing with that in mind when you're thinking about the reliability of an external partner, especially if you're working on a system where you have uh, certain days or periods where you know that there's going to be high traffic volume, becomes a key part of your planning. And a tool that I found that was really helpful for that was just modeling this as a finite state machine. Not necessarily in the code, but in a diagramming phase, and say, hey, you come in, you're in this state, now you want data, and now you're waiting on, you're in a pending state for getting data from the third party, and that might succeed, that might fail. Where do you go from there? And while you're in that pending state, what do you show? Do you show a spinner? Do you show your local data? And so mapping all the paths through all the transitions, and most critically, all of the sort of error or paths out, and making sure that they were not having people fall out of the system entirely, but having some way to bring them back in or deliver value regardless of your partner, was a key part of navigating what ended up being a kind of a mini crisis for this client.
I love that. It reminds me a little bit, and I'm going to expose myself with this audience, which is probably significantly superior technically, at least. So I'm going to expose my my limited hobbyist tech chops here. But it reminds me a bit of like sort of progressive enhancement with like JavaScript or something. You know, like you have a base version that works, and then you can kind of juice it up if the person has a better capabilities.
Yeah, it's definitely uh, language that I would use when we were talking about this progressive enhancement, graceful degradation. It's not technically what the terms mean, but broadly writ, that's exactly the experience that we're giving people, just over distributed systems rather than enablement of browser features.
All right, we've talked a lot about understanding complex systems. It hasn't come up yet, surprisingly. AI introduces another layer of complexity. We'll open up the floodgates here. Um, Obviously, many healthcare organizations are experimenting with AI while navigating, privacy, security, regulatory requirements. So let's talk a bit about what you've learned about enabling AI innovation, but managing, mitigating risk. And Clarissa, I know you've been working a lot lately on implementing new AI features. So let's start with you.
Yeah. So I had been working on a project where we wanted to implement an AI chat that users could uh, talk about um, their personal health issues, and they could like ask about like if certain products were a good fit for them. Um, and that introduced a little bit of risk of leaking personal identifiable information and PHI as well to LLMs. But I like to think that about this as like AIs are just like an external service that we are sending data to. So like we have to think about that all the time, and not only when we are implementing AI features. We are just like giving users more opportunity to expose themselves without our control. And so from the start, we looked at this and we just, it was a good thing because we have someone at thoughtbot working on a gem that's called Top Secret, which is a tool that helps you, uses machine learning to identify sensitive information and filter out sensitive information from user messages. So from day zero, we added this to user messages, and it was really nice because LLMs were surprisingly good at understanding of that. We didn't have to add anything to the prompts like, oh, whenever you see that uh, sensitive information, like sensitive, like filtered out information, treat that as like just we were hiding something that is sensitive. They were just really good at responding back using the same terms, so we just had to uh, how do you say it? The future, or like remove the future back to the user, and so we were uh, able to do that very nicely with Top Secret. And then, but Top Secret may not be perfect as you introduce it because you may need to do some additional training uh, to the model that you were using for filtering data. So we had a different layer that like because we wanted to protect users from sending personal data to LLMs, but also from like displaying personal data to users that were seeing the chats. They weren't seeing the chats actually. We were like doing some aggregation and some summaries, but we didn't want like users' data to come up in summaries. So what we did, we had like if for some reason a name leaked into an LLM, we would have another layer of an LLM that would filter out that information and for sure not show anything to that could identify users to whoever was seeing the data. So that worked pretty nicely. And I think that helps like thinking about that AI as just like another external service really helps thinking about like how we are handling data. Like I think it helps remove like the hesitancy of adding AI to your system because if you're doing that correctly, then you can use it in your system. Um, yeah, those are my thoughts about that.
Joelle, are you agreeing with AI as another external system?
I love that framing because it's easy, AI is sort of new and shiny, and we have all these concerns about it. But when you think of it in that lens, you already have heuristics from your team on how you handle PHI with external vendors. And so a lot of those same heuristics can apply to working with AI. So it doesn't have to be sort of come up with a net new framework for how to think about these problems. A lot of your current framework still applies.
Yeah, and I can't believe we made it. Was it 15 minutes? Someone should mark it down
Can you believe it? Yeah, it's amazing.
without saying AI. Yeah. Um, no, and I agree with what's been said. Also, I just wanted to just share a bit about some of what we're doing at Merck. We do have multi levels of governance around AI. So we have a multidisciplinary team that has like our IT risk management and security function, but also some folks with like regulatory expertise. So, folks that are deep AI kind of gurus, bringing that perspective, folks that are security minded, kind of bringing that classic security approach, but then also folks that have a lot of experience navigating, regulatory agencies and things like that. So we do have an official group when we're starting AI initiatives that can kind of do some governance, and then depending on the effort, and really the bigger the effort, the bigger the governance. Usually, we'll also have kind of tiered governance among like sponsors. So if we have major AI investments that we're making, we had announced a deal with Google a couple months ago, and we're calling these programs lighthouses. So we have these five big ones that have kind of they're going to be bigger investments, but then they'll also have kind of more senior level governance. Again, for more control of the initiatives, and to basically make sure that we're getting return on our investment. But then for smaller things, I realize that everything I've said so far does not sound like innovation. It sounds like kind of the opposite of innovation. So you kind of have to pick your spots. And on smaller things, what we're trying to do now is to really encourage folks to help themselves. I'm in IT basically, but our business partners within research, manufacturing, marketing, we have approved tools like we're now using Gemini, as I mentioned, and we also use Microsoft Copilot. We're encouraging folks to kind of help themselves, kind of on the small, without starting a big, official effort that then gets sometimes slowed by extra governance. So there's really two paths, depending on the size of the investment and the risk.
For one of these smaller initiatives, uh, how do you go about considering what maybe data sources are acceptable to be used with AI within one of these sort of less regulated pods? Do you sort of classify like some groups of data are accessible to these sort of less regulated groups and some are not? Do you have sort of guidance policies? Are you running your own local models to like gate some of these things? I'm curious how you're managing that risk in practice.
Yeah, so it's a good question. We do have a tiered information classification and information sensitivity classification system for things that are public, proprietary, confidential, or sensitive. So we have to label, all of our data. Um, we have different systems that are sort of rated for different levels of data. So like, you can use Microsoft 365, that's sort of certified with sensitive information. Whereas, a newer tool or something that, we haven't kind of implemented all of the right architecture and plumbing, you just can't even expose, data to that. And we're required. We have it's kind of your I shouldn't be careful what I say, but we have our annual trainings on it to make sure that we're up to date on the classifications, kind of all that you've all probably seen. Um, but then it's interesting on some of the smaller ones. To your point, it does get a little bit. It could get a little bit Wild West if you're not careful, or you could build something kind of to your point before with like a really slow API or something. You can kind of get yourself in trouble if and this is an oversimplification, but like if you're sort of like a hobbyist, who hasn't done this very much, and now you're using your own Copilot agent that it's your first agent you've ever made, you probably don't know all of the foot guns that tend to happen when accessing data. So we do see some of that sometimes where you can take something so far, but then you kind of paint yourself into an architectural corner.
On the kind of building on the topic of enabling internal teams, Joel, I know you're also thinking a lot about AI for development itself.
Yeah, I mean,
How does that work in the context of, yeah, like more regulated projects or clients?
yeah, I'm a developer, and of course, I see a tool like this. The first thing I'm thinking is, how can I use this to help myself, at the jobs that I do? Um, and I think I do tend to sort of really break down a lot of AI usage into sort of what's embedded in the product and deals with customer data because it's, tied to the database or whatever, versus what is a dev enablement tool. And those I think have sort of oftentimes fundamentally different sort of risk profiles to think about. Typically, the in-product AI, you want that locked down a lot more versus a tool that I run locally to help me write code or to ideate or to solve problems needs a lot less. Um, sort of question some people have is around source code and whether you want an external vendor to see your source code. Um, that will probably depend on the agreement you sign with an external LLM company if you're using an external model versus hosting your own. But if you are using a tool like that, there's so many really interesting things you can do that actually can improve your code base and improve your security. And one that's really simple that I did is I built a sort of miniature penetration testing agent that would analyze the code. So it's sort of a white box situation, find potential vectors for attacks. And then this is a Rails app. So it outputs a suite of either request or capybara based specs to effectively validate its hypotheses. And they're written so that they are green if we've shown that this is not a security risk, and they're red, they're a failing test if they are a security risk, if you're able to get through and do something malicious. And so it goes through, scans the code, makes a bunch of hypotheses, writes these up as actual attacks in a test file, executes the test file, and reports on what went wrong. But the nice thing is that in addition to the report, you also get this test file where everything that is a potential security vulnerability has a failing test that shows step by step how to reproduce it. So you don't even need like a repro step or anything. You've got the script right there. And you can hand that off to a developer to fix, and it's basically just a fix this. Or even going one step further, maybe you ask another coding agent to say, hey, I've got this failing test. Fix the code so that that test is now green. And, this is not a particularly sophisticated thing. I spent maybe an hour writing this up, and it catches real bugs or real security flaws. And so this is just scratching the surface of the really sort of impressive things you can do with a tool like that.
Clarissa, I see a lot of nodding. Has this been your experience as well?
I always learn a lot from Joel in this. I like using AI to support my development process, and I learned a lot from an internal talk that Joel was giving about harness engineering, and I've been using that a lot. Especially, I've been before I had a talk with I watched Joel's talk internally. I was using just Claude to say, oh, don't run anything against production, please. And so it would ask me like if eventually it wanted to run something in production, I would see like and say no. But by preemptively like adding a setting that it can run that in production, then I'm safer and less worried about accidentally clicking yes when it tries to run. It never happened actually, but I was very nervous about that. I'm still sometimes very nervous about using AI, but I think a lot of what Joel has been doing and sharing is very interesting, and I always learn from what he's doing. I consider myself an apprentice in that area, but it's very nice what we can do with all of that.
Yeah,
And
one of the things that we're thinking about and we're taking a bunch of action on, and it's maybe again a simpler version, Joel, of something that you mentioned, is to try to create as many like happy paths as we can, like easy happy paths for users. And again, realizing that this audience is a pretty technically sophisticated one, you may roll your eyes a bit, but like even things like deploying a simple web app or a simple website, even as literally a static website, can be really hard internally. Externally, you can use any number of free or super inexpensive things in like 2 seconds. But sometimes in a large enterprise, because of various security concerns and authorizations, it could take you like a month, to host a static website. So we're kind of in the midst of enumerating as many of these as possible. So we have our own little thing that we put up in front of S3 that's like 3 fields, and then you click go, and then, it just does everything in the background for you and publishes your site so that it's accessible internally to Merck, but not externally. Again, it's surprising how easy it is to mess that up, either not to be able to get the thing hosted, or probably worse, to get it hosted and then you look and you're like, oh my goodness, this is accessible externally. So we're working on as many of those as possible. And actually, I'll just share maybe it's a funny or silly insight, but my boss is the head of research IT at Merck, and she knows that I'm kind of a geek and I like to experiment with this stuff, and she's the same. We'll talk about AI coding and stuff like that. But she's a VP, right? She has a really big job. So she messaged me the other day. She's like, you know what? I hate to do this, but I'm calling in executive privilege. She's like, I've been trying to figure this thing out for a while. Can you just like hook me up with like as many of these tools as you can? So we have like the funnest thread now where we're like, oh baby, let's get her Claude Code. Let's get her GitHub Copilot. Oh, let's give her access to Rapid Web. So there's just a bunch of us now like celebrating all these gifts that we're giving to our VP.
that's always exciting when you build tech, but it's not just like, oh, I did some cool tech. Like you can see it had an impact on somebody and made their day easier. I always love those moments.
For sure.
I'm curious for your sort of deploy thing. Is that a sort of fully deterministic script? Is that something that's entirely just sort of mediated by an agent? Is it a sort of a pipeline with deterministic steps and some agentic steps? What does that look like architecturally?
Yeah, right now the ones that I mentioned are deterministic, so kind of just classic. We have a few folks, and we should make some introductions. Who like there's one guy in my team in particular that every time I mention anything, he's like, "Oh, why don't you just have AI do that?" We have like this email flow where you're submitting content into a competitive intelligence repository that has all these routing rules, and he sees all the rules. He's like, "Why don't you just have AI do that? Just tell him to forward the message, and AI will just figure it out." So yeah, no, we're the stuff that I'm mentioning is pretty straightforward and pretty deterministic.
It's interesting, right? We're talking about AI, but then we're also talking about automation in sort of more classic ways. And I feel like while AI has new possibilities, it also, in many ways, plays very similar to how we think about architecting and building automation in more sort of classic deterministic things. Um, and so for something like, hey, it takes a month to get a site out. Um, there are definitely some parts of that that can just be papered over with a deploy script or a sort of more deterministic process that you can handle. And for your sort of routing table thing, that's the thing that can be done deterministically, but maybe would be a little bit easier or less error prone with an AI. So sometimes you can have a whole AI do things. Sometimes you just drop it into an existing pipeline. Um, But I find that taking a sort of traditional automation mindset and considering AI just sort of one more tool you can use in your automation toolkit it still yields great results. Like it's AI is transformational in some ways, but in other ways, it's just amplifying existing patterns of building.
Yeah, I do think for what it's worth that AI has become like Smurf, and maybe I'm dating myself here, but if anyone remembers the Smurfs, that say, pass me that Smurfy thing, or which one? The Smurfy one. It just means like anything now. So everything is just AI, which is sort of a pet peeve. But yeah, I'm with you. I heard an analogy. I feel like we're going to be doing this for years. That even if like models don't get better or materially better, which they probably are, or whatever. But even if some people say the improvements have leveled off a little bit, just like all the stuff working around it and engaging with it, I think we have just years of benefit to get by doing some of the things that you just mentioned.
That's definitely, so you mentioned speed. Something that I have found is when I'm developing sort of net new processes, sometimes I'll start fully in an AI, just like, hey, I need to do this thing. Help me figure it out. And you go through it and it's slow and it burns a ton of tokens and all of that. And then eventually what you do is you realize, okay, there's a bunch of pieces that maybe they're sort of, you've generated them once and they can be reused instead of regenerated every time. Or you can, they don't necessarily need to be done by an AI. You could have a script do that. And so the exploratory phase for me often starts more LLM based, and then I start factoring out all sorts of deterministic pieces out of that. And that might be a script that runs to deterministically do some work. That might be if I'm outputting some kind of report, an HTML template, and then the LLM is just generating the insights or the data that goes into it. All sorts of things like that I've seen probably like easily like a 10x improvement in speed and oftentimes token cost as well by factoring out the deterministic parts.
Clarissa.
Oh no, yeah, I was just going to say that yesterday I was talking to a friend and he was mentioning that he was working on like he was working on centralizing data from a bunch of websites that don't have the same format. And like I've worked on a similar project like that before, years ago, before LLMs were a thing. And it was a nightmare because sometimes websites would change the format of the data that was there. And so when I was pulling data from APIs from like, I don't know, 29 or 30 websites, I had to like change the code every time, and it was definitely not sustainable. But this friend of mine, he's working on a similar project, like pulling government data from multiple states in Brazil, and he's using an AI for that. Like the AI writes the deterministic script of that, but then once the workflow breaks for some reason, the AI is able to self-correct and change the deterministic code and make it work again. And it's amazing, like what you can do with data migration using AI as well.
Yeah, to pull back something that Dave was saying, right? It's the code around the model really uh, unlocks sort of all sorts of new capabilities, and we're still scratching the surface of what that can do. I might be stretching the term a little bit here, but I'm going to call this the harness. I think you'd mentioned an internal talk I did about harness engineering earlier, Clarissa. And for anybody in the audience who's interested more in that idea, I'm going to do a little bit of self promotion here. I'm speaking at Rails World in September on harness engineering, specifically in the context of Rails applications. So if you're considering being at Rails World or you're going to be there and you're curious about the topic, come check out my talk.
Great plug. Love that plug. And Dave, I'm so grateful that you're able to share some of the specific projects you're working on and what's going on behind the scenes, because it's so interesting and valuable. Because you mentioned something like, oh, I haven't talked much about innovation yet. It's been, more about guardrails. But that's the whole thing, right? Like the two are inextricably connected. Um, and so thinking about, again, like that topic of creating happy paths for teams and how you balance the speed with innovation and compliance, whether that's AI or just even, other projects you've worked over the years. Um, Curious, like, how do you make that balance, or what are some kind of principles you have for uh, moving things forward for the teams you work with?
Yeah, so our former head of IT security and risk management, he's no longer with Merck, but he used to joke that he would make a self-effacing joke. He is awesome, but he was like, yeah, we put the no in innovation, which I always thought was a funny line. Um, but yeah, it's definitely a tough balance. I think there's things like GXP considerations, or there's certain like kind of non-starters where you're like, okay, this is like something that's regulated, that we just have to follow regulations if we want to be able to do business in that market. So that's kind of like the first thing, is there's certain areas that are just sort of like, this is the way it is, like we have to follow these kind of strict standards. But I think another part of it is, and I mentioned lots of governance before, which again sounds kind of slow, but I think one of the biggest things that I've been involved with, that for the last 2.5 years, I've been leading the Merck Research Labs Generative AI Functional Task Force, we call it. So this is a set of leaders across basically all but one part of Merck Research Labs that are bringing, initially when kind of ChatGPT first, came to be a thing, it was like, find our top ideas and turn those into our big investments. And over the course of the last 2.5 years, that's led to major investments in regulatory authoring, search summarized and insights, we call it, and then translations as kind of our big three just kind of work streams, we call them. But the side effect of that has been, and in the beginning, it was kind of kind of rigid, where we would do a lot of work with finance, because again, these were significant investments, and we would try to estimate what the benefit would be before doing a lot of work. But probably in addition to getting those work streams set up, what I think a huge benefit has just been the network that we've created. And at first we were really picky. I should be careful if someone's listening to this recording. We were very, very picky about, like, it's only 10 people that are on this team, but we've gotten a lot more. It's much more of like a community of practice, or a community of leaders. And it's basically kind of relatively senior, like executive directors and AVPs mostly, pretty like tech forward, and then leaders, whether or not they're in IT, that have they may have like development capabilities of their own, like they may have team members that can create tech. And honestly, just working that network has been one of the best benefits for me. And this is going to sound silly, but we have like a Teams chat, basically. I should say Zoom chat, right? Or Slack, I guess, right? But we have a Teams chat, so it's just really easy now in cases where it's not kind of something that's under regulatory scrutiny, where you could just really make really quick connections and move a bit faster.
Joël, what have you seen uh, in terms of maybe leaders of development teams that are kind of achieving this balance well?
There's definitely a human component to all of this as well, right? And sort of navigating, getting your team on board. Uh, you know, humans we're social creatures. We're not always as rational as we'd like ourselves to be. And so I really liked a phrase that Dave used earlier, the idea of happy paths. And sometimes we use them in terms of the actual tech, right? A happy path through a product, but the idea of making it easy to do the right thing. Um, and sometimes sort of conversely making it obvious when you're perhaps not on the correct path. And something that is really simple that I've seen and that I introduced on a team was we were writing a JavaScript front end that was pulling data from our internal backend. And sometimes if you're logged into your profile, you get to see actual health information because it's your profile. Uh, but now we're handling PHI. That's potentially dangerous. How do we make it easy for the developers not to accidentally leak PHI to other people or to make it accidentally accessible to people outside the organization? And something that was kind of so simple it sounds dumb was all of the functions that pull endpoints that potentially have PHI in them. We just put that in the name of the function. So the React hook is, you know, fetch patient with PHI, as opposed to there's another variant of it that is, you know, just fetch patient without the PHI. And it's the kind of thing that on code review, if you're like invoking that function in a place that should not have access to PHI, someone is much more likely to flag that on code review, be like, wait a minute, this thing says PHI on it, and you're using it in this page that is sometimes publicly accessible. That feels wrong. So humans are going to catch it on review. You yourself as a developer are more likely to catch that as you're writing it, because if you're typing out the words with PHI on a public page, you probably know you're doing something wrong. And finally, our good old friends AI. If you're doing some kind of AI scan, LLMs are really good at like globbing onto words. And so if you're asking them to just do a broad security check on this page, just make sure I'm doing everything right. If you just had fetch patient on the page, they might not think to like dig through to see, does it have PHI? But if it says fetch patients with PHI, it is going to really zoom in on that and be like, wait a minute, is that safe? Let me double check that. So I found that you get better results out of AI scans as well as human review just by doing something small like putting that label in there.
Clarissa, what have you experienced with these trade-offs when building and maintaining production systems?
I think for this, I want to plug some SRE practices here. Just because I think a lot of when you're building, when you build a robust observability strategy for your system, and this is especially important as you're scaling, I think it helps you balance innovation with fixing things or just like trying to make sure your systems are reliable before you introduce new things. So I think observability and like introducing SLOs and SLAs and SLIs to your system when, especially when it's very large, it will help you not lose sight of issues that are happening. And when you have an observability first mindset, like everything that you introduce, you must have visibility on whether it's working and its impact on the system. I think it really helps you move more confidently and introduce more things like safely. Um, and then I think there is also the basics of like trying to make sure you are deploying with like as few human how do I say that? Um, I mean, like, try to automate your deployment process as much as possible. I feel like this is very basic, but it's very easy to not pay attention to that because deploying is very easy nowadays. Like, if you run a command from your laptop and it's deployed, why would you bother to transfer that into your CI/CD workflows if you can just do it very easily. But that also introduces a risk of human mistakes. And so if you have a deployment practice that is very robust and it doesn't require you having special access from your machine, for example, like it's very nice. One thing that I like about what we've done here at thoughtbot for a few projects recently was adding CI/CD to infrastructure changes as well. So like I don't have production access. I don't have like I can't log in into AWS and see and like edit things there in production. But my CI/CD process has that access and is able to deploy to production and apply infrastructure changes to production. So it's less risky that you were going to do something wrong if you have an automated process for that.
It sounds like that gives you a more sort of fine-grained sort of authorization structure as well, where maybe you'd feel uncomfortable giving every developer on your team at a, on a 1,000 developer large team, like direct access to production in the database and all that, especially if it's got PHI. But allowing them to commit, and when something goes through, having it deploy through CI/CD is a much lower risk way of allowing people to go to production quickly
Hmm.
without giving them access.
Yeah, exactly. And because we use BRs for that, we also like have a chance to have other developers review the changes that we are applying to like infrastructure before hitting the button. And so like they can see the Terraform plans in a PR comment and they can see like what's everything that's going to happen. And by having like someone else review and then you merge the PR and then it gets deployed, that's a lot safer than running Terraform apply locally and just something going awry.
And you get auditability too.
Yeah,
Someone made this change at this time, and that might be responsible for the effects that you've seen.
exactly. And you have the versions as well, which is like you were saying that earlier, but it's very I love versioning. And like being able to see like why something changed it is very valuable for long-term documentation of decisions.
All right, y'all, we have just about 5 minutes left. I knew this would happen. Too much good ground to cover here. Um, so I think, we'll end with like maybe a really quick around the horn, looking forward, um, you know, between the complexities of AI and connected systems, changing regulations, what's your top or most recent piece of advice for leaders that are navigating this to be successful and productive?
Yeah, I could take a quick shot. I feel bad. I have nothing to plug. Um, I think Clarissa and Joel both had good plugs. So maybe can I plug the Austin Tech Leaders meetup? Everyone should go to the Austin Tech Leaders meetups.
Yeah, you can absolutely.
That's
We're
my
having a whole lot of fun at the Austin Tech Leaders meetups, y'all.
that's,
So come on by.
yeah. So that's my plug. And sorry, now I wasted a little bit of time, but yeah, I guess I'd say focus on culture. And this is one of the things that I've been thinking about a lot, like an engineering culture. And when you think about thoughtbot, or at least when I think of thoughtbot, I think of the strong engineering culture, also very strong design culture, also very strong product culture. And we're trying to do a lot of that. We're trying to emulate things like that, within Merck, basically. So it's a much bigger enterprise. So obviously it's a little bit of the context is different. But just one example, we are now doing something that's kind of ish similar to investment hours, where we're basically asking everyone in the organization to do a tech project, and it could be work related, but it doesn't have to be. So I made like a little. It's kind of funny. This is a couple of years ago now, and I did this sort of the old way, but I made a version of Wordle, for example, but every answer related to research IT. So it was like a little educational thing. I'm working on a version of Connections right now. If anyone plays the New York Times games, that would be little educational thing. So just allowing us to have a little bit of that like fun with tech is something that we're doing, and that's what I would encourage others to do as well.
That's great. Thanks, Dave. Joelle, what do you think?
I feel like we circled around this idea a little bit throughout the entire conversation. Is that is, while there's a lot of new and exciting things happening in tech right now, a lot of the ways that we navigate them are grounded in sort of classic principles. And so I think I might plug a little bit of a back to the fundamentals approach, and making sure that your team is grounded in some of those fundamentals. Um, a particular example I'm going to give is just a really basic understanding of combinatorics, because a lot of building software is composition, combining pieces together. And every time you have a composition, you sort of get a multiplication of all the different states that can happen. And so, whether that is sort of a large series of nested conditionals where you're trying to trace a happy path, but maybe there's a bunch of unhappy paths, or even some paths that shouldn't even be possible, but somehow your code is written to allow that, combinatorics is going to help you there. If you're trying to think about, we talked a little bit about, I think, Clarissa, you mentioned testing, the value of that. How do you make sure that you've got adequate test coverage? Combinatorics also going to help you think about that. When you're thinking about how do two external systems interact with each other, and is there any surface for security attacks, or any paths that might allow you to inadvertently reveal PHI? Combinatorics is one of the first tools I reach for. So back to basics, but dip your toes in the world of combinatorics with your team. That's a really rich place that I think pays off on all sorts of software, but particularly where you're trying to get a sort of relatively cheap investment, but a lot of sort of security and quality payoff. That's often what you're trying to balance when you're working in healthcare projects.
And Clarissa, you get the final word.
Yeah, that's the most important one, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, I think I got biased hearing Joel. But I think I think my advice would be to make sure you're fostering creativity in your and I think it also connects with what David was talking about, which is culture related, like foster creativity in this space because we don't know, like a year ago it sounded like completely wild to think about that we could use plug AI into certain things like wow, you're able to like point to a comet and have it read the comet for you. And nowadays it's just like very basic. And so in this, it's very hard for an individual to keep up with everything that's going on. And so if you foster creativity in that space for your company, it's very likely that people are going to be excited about what's coming up and they will share with others and they will learn how to do that well. And also, um, I think one other advice I would have is to also encourage people to be disciplined about how they are using AI and not rush people into like trying to deliver 10 PRs a day using AI because AI is faster and AI can produce a bunch of code very fast. I think if you are able to help people do that in a responsible way, I think there's a lot uh, like a great opportunity for you to improve the processes in your company with that.
Wow. I mean, thanks so much, y'all. This has
Did you hear the
been
fireworks?
no. Is
Yeah,
that how you ended the talk?
yeah.
Safety first. Um, I've really enjoyed this conversation. I've learned a lot, and I'm sure folks watching have as well. I want to be mindful of everyone's time, but Dave, Joel, Clarissa, thank you so much for coming and sharing your stories and experiences and insights. And thanks to everyone who joined us live or is watching this from the future. I think, and that's it from me. Thanks, y'all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for having me on.